We've all heard the whispers, the promises of an awakening consciousness. Perhaps you're even standing on its precipice right now, that transformative threshold where the veils of illusion begin to thin, and a profound new understanding of life shimmers into focus. It's the allure of clarity, the seductive whisper of ultimate truth about the very fabric of reality. But in this often romanticized narrative, a crucial chapter remains largely untold, a vital dimension often shrouded in silence. The journey towards self-knowledge, the very act of seeking this awakening, is far from a gentle stroll into perpetual sunlight. For many, it is a profound and often disorienting descent, a pilgrimage through the intricate labyrinth of our own shadows. When we consciously choose to awaken, we aren't simply ascending to a realm of uninterrupted bliss. Awakening, in its raw and unfiltered truth, is an act of radical opening, an unlocking of doors we've long kept sealed, revealing the hidden chambers within ourselves that we've consciously or unconsciously ignored. Embracing full consciousness is akin to stepping through a cosmic portal, where not only radiant light, but also profound shadow awaits our arrival. Behind every dazzling insight lies a deeper, often unsettling, layer of our being. Behind every liberating revelation, there lurks a facet of ourselves we've instinctively avoided confronting. This exploration delves into this neglected and undeniably uncomfortable aspect of awakening, the crucial dance with our darkness, and why its embrace is not just necessary, but foundational. Understanding the shadowy terrain of this journey isn't about recoiling from the hard truths we uncover. Rather, it's about embracing the totality of the human experience, with all its inherent complexities and contradictions. There exists a pervasive notion, almost a myth woven into the fabric of spiritual discourse, that the awakening of consciousness operates like a magical incantation, a swift and decisive solution to all our earthly woes. It's often presented as the golden ticket to a life overflowing with fulfillment, miraculously devoid of suffering, a serene oasis of uninterrupted peace where we finally, effortlessly, discover our authentic selves. For many yearning souls, awakening appears as a sanctuary of rest, a blissful refuge where the sharp edges of the world's pain can no longer penetrate. But this alluring vision is often the first, and perhaps the most insidious, trap on the path of awakening. Its subtlety is matched only by its power to mislead. This kind of wishful thinking seduces us into believing that merely reaching a certain vibrational frequency or achieving a specific state of enlightenment will magically dissolve all our challenges. It's an undeniably enticing prospect, one that promises instant relief and unfortunately transforms the profound journey of awakening into a consumable product, readily purchased in the desperate pursuit of immediate inner peace. The stark truth, however, is that awakening is less about a miraculous escape from pain and far more about learning to perceive pain through a radically different lens. It's not about the impossible task of eliminating problems entirely, but about cultivating the wisdom to coexist with their inherent nature, without the ingrained reflex to flee or suppress them. This is often the initial point of profound disillusionment for many earnest seekers. The dawning realization that awakening doesn't magically erase the fundamental human condition, doesn't eradicate imperfections, nagging doubts, or persistent anxieties. In fact, the opposite is often true. It amplifies our perception of them, bringing them into sharper, sometimes painfully clear, focus. True, authentic spirituality offers no convenient shortcuts, no bypasses around the essential work. It demands courageous confrontation, not skillful avoidance. And confronting oneself in the rawest sense is inherently painful. It compels us to stand face to face with everything we've diligently ignored, carefully hidden, or deeply repressed over the long arc of our lives. Upon embarking on the profound journey of awakening, one of the earliest and most formidable adversaries we encounter is the ego. This intricate and deeply ingrained structure of identity is the very framework we've meticulously constructed throughout our lives to navigate the world. The ego is a remarkably complex and surprisingly sophisticated edifice, and it does not take kindly to being challenged, much less systematically deconstructed. Therefore, when an individual approaches awakening with the expectation that it will somehow exalt or elevate their pre-existing sense of self-importance, they are often met with a jarring abyss of frustration. For genuine awakening does not nourish the ego. Instead, it relentlessly reveals its inherent fragility. The ego desperately clings to comforting illusions. I am special. I am evolving faster than others. I am now above the illusions that ensnare the masses. And tragically, the very spiritual journey intended to liberate can become yet another subtle form of personal glorification, a new badge of honor to polish and display. But true awakening does not bestow a coveted status of superiority. It demands a profound and humbling surrender. It unveils the fundamental truth that we are not isolated, exceptional beings separate from the vast, interconnected web of existence, but rather a small, yet vital, wave in the immeasurable ocean of being. The seductive illusion of awakened as a title that elevates us above our fellow humans dissolves, leaving the individual in a position of profound humility before the awe-inspiring vastness of the universe. An inevitable wave of disillusionment washes over those who truly commit to the path of awakening. And this disillusionment, though necessary, can be profoundly painful. It feels as though the very foundations of our mental landscape, the beliefs, absolute truths, and external solutions we've long clung to for stability, begin to crumble and dissolve. Disillusionment is not a destructive force, but rather a potent process of cleansing, a radical shedding of all the preconceived notions and rigid beliefs we've painstakingly constructed about life and, most importantly, about ourselves. And this cleansing, for the most part, is deeply uncomfortable because it pulls away the very ground we thought we stood upon, leaving us feeling vulnerable and exposed. As our consciousness expands, it inevitably illuminates the long-forgotten corners of our inner landscape, the internal shadows. This is the accumulated collection of everything we have consciously or unconsciously repressed, strategically hidden, or vehemently denied about ourselves. The vast majority of us instinctively prefer to keep these shadowy aspects safely locked away, diligently maintaining an idealized, often meticulously curated image of our spiritual self. But inevitably, sooner or later, the shadow will manifest, often in unexpected and disruptive ways, and there is simply no authentic way to proceed on the journey of awakening without bravely turning to face it. The shadow is formed by everything we actively avoid seeing within ourselves. It encompasses the character traits we deem utterly unacceptable, the emotions we consider shameful or overwhelmingly painful, and the buried memories that still exert a subtle, often unconscious, influence. It is the repository of everything we repress, because it jarringly clashes with the carefully constructed image we have painstakingly created for ourselves and diligently project to the world. What many often forget, or perhaps conveniently ignore, is that by attempting to suppress or deny these darker aspects of ourselves, they do not simply vanish into thin air. On the contrary, they remain stubbornly latent within our being, operating in the shadowy realms of our unconscious, subtly yet powerfully influencing our choices, shaping our relationships, and coloring our entire perception of the world. Facing the shadow, therefore, means consciously coming into direct contact with aspects of ourselves that can feel deeply disturbing, triggering, and even terrifying. Yet, paradoxically, the shadow also holds immense power and untapped potential. More importantly, it safeguards valuable fragments of our vital life energy. Unconsciously, a significant portion of your precious vital energy, or chi, is continuously expended in the Sisyphean task of keeping your metaphorical skeletons in the closet. And this constant suppression, over the long term, can have profoundly detrimental consequences for our overall well-being and spiritual growth. Many well-meaning individuals mistakenly believe that shadow work is merely an optional add-on, a supplementary practice to the real spiritual journey. However, facing our dark side, delving into the depths of our unacknowledged selves, is not just a compliment, it is the very path itself. When we bravely dive into the murky waters of our shadow, we inevitably encounter traits that starkly contradict our carefully cultivated self-image: envy, gnawing jealousy, simmering resentment, subtle arrogance, crippling insecurity. It can be profoundly painful to realize that no matter how diligently we have striven to be good or spiritual, these less than virtuous emotions and impulsive tendencies still reside within us, often lurking just beneath the surface. This is the pivotal moment when we confront the self we believed we had long overcome, the uncomfortable truth that the aspects we most desperately wanted to disown still undeniably exist within the intricate tapestry of our being. The shadow often manifests most vividly and undeniably in the intricate dynamics of our relationships. Each person we encounter, especially those who trigger strong emotional reactions within us, whether intense anger, deep-seated fear, or even disproportionate and obsessive attraction, acts in some way as a mirror, reflecting aspects of our own unacknowledged shadow. What profoundly bothers or inexplicably fascinates us in others are often the very aspects of our own personality that we have diligently ignored, actively rejected, or strategically suppressed. This fascinating psychological phenomenon is what the renowned psychiatrist Carl Jung astutely termed projection, where our own repressed traits, unacceptable impulses, and unresolved feelings are unconsciously attributed to, or projected onto, others. By consciously realizing that what irritates or captivates us in another person actually resides, in some form, within ourselves, we can begin to utilize our relationships as a powerful pathway to profound self-knowledge, significantly reducing the ingrained tendency to blame external sources for what, in reality, originates within our own internal landscape. Integrating the shadow does not, and crucially, should not, mean indiscriminately embracing harmful behaviors or acting out destructive impulses. Instead, it signifies a radical act of acceptance, acknowledging that these less than ideal traits and uncomfortable emotions are an inherent part of our wholeness, integral threads in the rich and complex tapestry of our being. When we vehemently resist the shadow, desperately trying to suppress or deny its existence, it paradoxically strengthens its subtle yet persistent control over us. But by consciously recognizing, acknowledging, and ultimately accepting these darker aspects, they gradually begin to lose their unconscious power over our psyche and our behavior. Carl Jung wisely stated that the arduous process of individuation, the lifelong quest for profound self-knowledge, and the harmonious integration of all aspects of the personality, both light and shadow, is the true and unwavering path to wholeness and genuine transformation. Courageously facing the shadow ultimately sets us free, because what we consciously recognize and understand loses its insidious ability to dominate us from the unseen realms of the unconscious. Aspects like intense anger or deep-seated fear, when brought into the light of conscious awareness and truly understood, can be transmuted into valuable tools for self-knowledge and growth. Anger, for example, can serve as a crucial indicator of violated boundaries and unmet needs, while fear can illuminate the profound value of courage and resilience. This ongoing process of shadow integration not only fosters deeper self-acceptance, but also cultivates greater compassion for others as we begin to recognize and understand their own unspoken shadows without judgment, knowing that every human being carries their own unique collection of unacknowledged parts. On the intricate journey of awakening, the ego consistently reveals itself as a formidable and frequently encountered obstacle. In a fundamental sense, the ego can be understood as a carefully crafted mask, meticulously created over time to protect our fragile sense of identity and relentlessly reinforce our perceived self-importance. Yet, paradoxically, this very same ego, in its desperate attempts to maintain control, is often the primary source of deep-seated internal conflicts and unnecessary suffering. Our mind, habitually accustomed to constructing and diligently maintaining a seemingly solid and stable image of who we are, naturally tends to resist the profound transformations that the process of awakening inevitably brings. This inherent resistance is a natural and understandable response, but to truly move beyond its limiting grip, we must cultivate a deeper understanding of how the ego functions, what its core motivations are, and why it reacts with such profound fear and forceful control to the very idea of its own dissolution. The ego serves as the self-proclaimed center of our individual identity, a complex psychological structure that diligently maintains our ingrained beliefs, persistent desires, and the carefully curated self-image we've laboriously built over time. It is primarily responsible for generating and reinforcing our feeling of being distinct, separate, and often inherently different from the rest of the world. And it is precisely this ingrained sense of separation, this illusion of individual autonomy taken to an extreme, that frequently becomes a significant obstacle on the authentic spiritual path. The ego thrives on creating an illusory sense of permanence and unwavering stability, constantly attempting to convince us that we are definitively defined by our fleeting thoughts, subjective opinions, and the often embellished narratives of our personal stories. Throughout the course of our lives, the ego diligently strengthens its grip through a multitude of experiences and the inherent human need for psychological protection. It tenaciously clings to external labels, perceived successes, and even past failures, constantly seeking external validation and affirmation of its inherent worth. And thus, any genuine attempt at spiritual transcendence, any subtle indication that our carefully constructed identity might not be as solid and unshakable as it relentlessly proclaims, invariably generates significant internal resistance, often manifesting as fear, anxiety, and a fierce determination to maintain the status quo. The ego deeply fears its own dissolution, perceiving the process of awakening as a profound and terrifying threat, a symbolic death of its very essence. For the ego, relinquishing its cherished certainties, its rigid definitions, and its illusion of absolute control feels akin to losing its very existence, a complete and utter annihilation. This primal fear ignites enormous internal resistance whenever we are presented with an invitation to expand our consciousness beyond its self-imposed limitations. When confronted with the potential for transformative growth, the ego instinctively responds with a barrage of defensive thoughts, powerful negative emotions such as fear and anger, and persistent doubts designed to undermine our progress and keep us safely within its familiar, albeit restrictive, boundaries. It's as if the ego actively fights to maintain its perceived control, desperately trying to avoid being absorbed or transcended by something larger, more profound, and ultimately beyond its limited comprehension. This intense internal struggle is a recurring theme described in various spiritual traditions throughout history. Jesus, when stating the paradoxical truth that we must lose our life to gain it, refers directly to the essential need to relinquish the illusions and attachments of the ego in order to discover our true and authentic life. This losing of the self does not imply literal annihilation or complete obliteration, but rather a liberating opening to a new and more expansive way of being in the world. Some individuals mistakenly believe that merging with a higher power, whether conceived as God, the light, or the universal consciousness, necessarily entails a complete loss of individual identity. However, the reality is often the very opposite. It signifies an expansion of our individual consciousness to encompass the entirety of the universe, a recognition of our interconnectedness rather than our separateness. Speaking in terms of vibration and energy, when two waves are aligned in both their frequency and their phase, they create a phenomenon known as constructive interference. The energy of both individual waves constructively combines, resulting in a single wave with a significantly greater amplitude. Similarly, transcending the ego allows our individual consciousness to align with the higher frequencies of universal consciousness, leading not to a loss of self, but to an amplification of our being, a deeper resonance with the interconnected web of life. In its relentless quest for control and self-preservation, the ego can even subtly attempt to appropriate the very spiritual journey intended to liberate us from its grasp. It cunningly wears the mask of enlightenment, creating the seductive illusion that it has already attained a higher state of being. In his insightful book, The Mask of Enlightenment, the Buddhist teacher Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche eloquently explains that this insidious form of false spirituality is ultimately just another desperate attempt by the ego to protect itself. It subtly transforms genuine spirituality into a coveted title, a personal achievement to be proudly displayed, rather than the profound and ongoing journey of detachment and surrender that it truly is. This deceptive phenomenon can be readily observed when the ego subtly crafts a holy self-image, becoming deeply attached to self-congratulatory ideas of spiritual superiority, falsely believing itself to be significantly more evolved or enlightened than others. By engaging in this subtle form of spiritual bypassing, the ego cleverly avoids the genuine, often challenging inner work required for true awakening, and instead substitutes a hollow role-playing, a superficial performance of spirituality for authentic transformation. This subtle yet powerful trap of pseudo-enlightenment can effectively paralyze genuine spiritual growth, keeping the individual perpetually trapped within a self-constructed cycle of illusion and self-deception. The only reliable way to transcend the persistent influence of the ego is through the diligent cultivation of constant vigilance and profound humility. We must learn to observe our own thoughts, deeply examine our underlying motivations, and closely scrutinize our attitudes with unwavering honesty. This ongoing exercise in heightened self-awareness actively prevents the ego from subtly seizing control of our spiritual journey and steering us down self-serving paths. St. Augustine, in his timeless Confessions, wisely observed that genuine self-knowledge invariably leads to profound humility. For the more deeply we understand our own inherent weaknesses and limitations, the less inclination we have to exalt ourselves or seek unwarranted praise. This crucial practice of detached self-observation, recommended across various spiritual traditions, consists of consciously witnessing our thoughts and emotions as they arise, without immediately identifying with them or becoming entangled in their narratives. By diligently practicing this non-judgmental awareness, we gradually begin to recognize that the incessant chatter and self-serving narratives of the ego are not our true and essential nature. This crucial act of disidentification, of recognizing ourselves as the observing awareness rather than the turbulent content of our minds, is a pivotal step in weakening the ego's powerful hold and bringing us closer to a purer, more genuine, and ultimately more liberating experience of reality. Cultivating a silent, alert presence allows us to experience the richness and fullness of life directly, unburdened by the limiting interpretations and self-imposed restrictions of the ego. The spiritual journey is rarely the linear path of unbroken light and perpetual serenity that it is often portrayed to be. More often than not, it reveals itself as a challenging and transformative crossing through a deep and shadowy abyss, a profound and often disorienting process traditionally known as the dark night of the soul. This evocative concept, originating from the profound mystical insights of Saint John of the Cross, describes a deeply challenging state of profound spiritual and emotional crisis, where everything that once seemed certain and meaningful appears to dissolve, leaving one feeling utterly lost, adrift, and questioning the very purpose and meaning of life itself. This crucial chapter invites us to delve into this undeniably painful yet ultimately transformative experience, to understand its significance and to glean wisdom from its depths. The dark night of the soul is not merely a negative or destructive experience to be avoided at all costs. Rather, it is often a necessary and profoundly significant phase for deep and lasting spiritual growth. During this challenging stage, the individual may experience feelings of profound existential helplessness, a seemingly irreversible loss of purpose and direction, and a deeply unsettling absence of connection with the sacred or the divine. What once seemed like a clearly illuminated path forward now appears to fade into an impenetrable darkness, leading to intense introspection, painful self-examination, and a fundamental questioning of one's most deeply held beliefs about life and the very nature of reality. Thomas More, in his insightful book Care of the Soul, eloquently explains that this arduous phase is not a punishment, but rather a profound invitation, an inner calling to strip away the comforting illusions we have painstakingly built around ourselves and the world, ultimately preparing us for a new and more authentic understanding of the sacred that lies within and beyond. The intense crisis that characterizes the dark night of the soul is frequently accompanied by a profound sense of isolation, loneliness, and disconnection from others and even from one's own inner resources. Yet, as Paulo Coelho poignantly points out in his allegorical masterpiece The Alchemist, this period of profound darkness is often a necessary passage for us to discover the radiant inner light that resides within each of us. The accompanying pain, confusion, and disorientation act as potent catalysts, forcing us to confront long unrecognized truths about ourselves and to finally abandon the limiting beliefs and outdated perspectives that have kept us imprisoned in cycles of suffering. This transformative process can be powerfully compared to the remarkable metamorphosis of a caterpillar. Just as the caterpillar undergoes a complete and often unseen transformation into a butterfly during a period of darkness and apparent solitude within the chrysalis, we too can undergo a profound and lasting inner transformation by fully accepting and courageously traversing the seemingly desolate abyss of the dark night of the soul. The intense pain and profound disorientation experienced during this challenging period can ultimately lead us to a profound spiritual rebirth, where a new, more authentic vision of ourselves and the world around us emerges from the ashes of our former illusions. One of the key principles for successfully navigating the dark night of the soul is radical acceptance. Carl Jung wisely asserted that what you resist persists, while conversely, what you accept can transform. During this intensely challenging period of pain, confusion, and uncertainty, resistance to what is only serves to prolong and deepen our suffering. When we consciously choose to accept the situation we find ourselves in, allowing ourselves to fully feel the entire spectrum of emotions that arise without judgment or suppression, we begin to create the necessary inner space for profound and lasting transformation to occur. Embracing the dark night as an integral and necessary part of our spiritual journey, rather than futilely fighting against it, allows us to gradually release the need for control and, in doing so, often leads us to discover a lighter, albeit perhaps initially unseen path through the darkness. This arduous process of confronting our inner darkness can ultimately lead to a level of profound clarity that once seemed utterly unattainable. The invaluable lessons learned during the depths of this challenging experience prepare us to live a more authentic and congruent life, one that is more deeply aligned with our truest and most essential selves. Emerging from the dark night of the soul does not necessarily mean that all pain has miraculously vanished, but rather that we have cultivated a newfound capacity to carry our life experiences, both light and shadow, with greater wisdom, resilience, and lightness of being, ultimately discovering a deeper and more meaningful purpose in our lives. In the earnest quest for a higher state of consciousness and inner clarity, it is remarkably easy to inadvertently fall into the subtle and often insidious trap of spiritual superiority. As we deepen our spiritual practices and expand our intellectual understanding of spiritual principles, the ego can cleverly co-opt these very experiences, subtly transforming them into a false and inflated sense of grandeur. Hidden pride can silently and insidiously infiltrate our thoughts and attitudes, leading us to believe, often unconsciously, that we have somehow transcended the struggles of others and now occupy a higher rung on the supposed ladder of spiritual evolution. Enlightenment, in its idealized and often misconstrued form, is frequently presented as the ultimate pinnacle of spiritual attainment. However, the very act of striving for this idealized state can quickly devolve into a subtle form of spiritual competition, a subconscious measuring of one's own progress against the perceived shortcomings of others. The insightful spiritual teacher Osho, in The Revolution of Consciousness, astutely emphasizes that when enlightenment becomes primarily a matter of personal status and a means of bolstering the ego, we inevitably move further and further away from its true and liberating purpose. The ego, in its relentless pursuit of validation, begins to subtly seek external affirmation through perceived spiritual achievements, leading to the insidious belief that we are now operating on a significantly higher level of spiritual development compared to those who may not share our specific beliefs or practices. Brené Brown, in her powerful work, The Gifts of Imperfection, eloquently describes pride not as a genuine expression of self-worth, but often as a defensive mechanism, a veiled attempt to protect our underlying vulnerabilities and insecurities. When we feel deeply insecure about our inherent worthiness, we may unconsciously cling to a false sense of superiority in an attempt to compensate for these deeply felt uncertainties. This subtle yet damaging defense mechanism can manifest in a myriad of ways, such as subtly belittling the experiences or perspectives of others, developing a hypercritical attitude towards those who do not adhere to the same spiritual path as ourselves, or even engaging in subtle forms of spiritual one-upmanship. This kind of isolating behavior not only inadvertently pushes others away, creating unnecessary distance in our relationships, but also tragically prevents us from recognizing and appreciating the inherent richness and diversity of human experiences and perspectives. By unconsciously erecting a rigid barrier of perceived spiritual superiority between ourselves and others, we inevitably lose invaluable opportunities to learn and grow from the unique wisdom, diverse paths, and contrasting perspectives that our fellow human beings offer. True, authentic spirituality should serve as a profound invitation to greater inclusion, understanding, and empathy, where the lived experiences of all individuals are deeply valued and respected, rather than a competitive arena to determine who possesses more knowledge, adheres to the correct doctrines, or has achieved a supposedly higher level of spiritual understanding. As we delve deeper into our own individual spiritual journeys, we also run the distinct risk of inadvertently isolating ourselves within a self-constructed spiritual bubble. Jack Kornfield, in his compassionate and insightful book The Path of Love, wisely observes that excessive introspection and an overemphasis on solitary spiritual practices can sometimes distance us from the very real world and the vital importance of authentic human interactions and genuine connection. We can become so intensely focused on our own personal spiritual growth and perceived purification that we gradually lose our natural capacity for empathy, compassion, and genuine connection with the everyday struggles and joys of others. This subtle but significant disconnection can inadvertently foster a sense of spiritual superiority, where we begin to unconsciously view the world through a dualistic lens, those who are awake and on the right path versus those who are still asleep or misguided. This kind of rigid and judgmental duality is ultimately harmful and counterproductive to genuine spiritual growth, as it perpetuates the very illusion of separation that true spirituality seeks to transcend and subtly feeds the insidious roots of hidden pride. True and authentic spirituality fundamentally requires the cultivation of profound humility. And genuine humility is not about self-deprecation or devaluing one's own worth. Rather, it is about consciously redirecting our primary focus outward towards understanding and serving others, rather than being solely preoccupied with our own internal experiences and perceived spiritual advancements. Humility helps us to recognize the fundamental truth that the spiritual journey is ultimately a shared human experience, where we are all interconnected travelers, learning and growing together, each navigating our own unique set of struggles and challenges. Ultimately, true spirituality is most powerfully revealed not in grand pronouncements or displays of esoteric knowledge, but in the consistent and selfless practice of genuine service and heartfelt compassion towards all beings. The ego can easily distort and corrupt the spiritual pursuit, subtly leading us to believe that our accumulated knowledge, dedicated practices, or profound insights somehow place us on a pedestal above others. However, genuine enlightenment is not about being perceived as superior or attaining a coveted status. It is fundamentally about the increasing willingness to humbly serve others with an open heart. When we consciously begin to view our spiritual journey not as a solitary ascent to personal glory, but as a profound means of helping, supporting, and uplifting our fellow human beings, we naturally and organically move away from the isolating and ultimately self-defeating mindset of spiritual superiority. Serving others with no expectation of reward or recognition becomes a true and authentic reflection of our own unfolding awakening, a tangible opportunity to deeply connect with the shared humanity that binds us all and to actively contribute to creating a more compassionate and interconnected world. Awakening to consciousness is not about reaching some definitive and static state of pure light, but rather about courageously opening ourselves to perceive and embrace the full spectrum of the human experience, with all its inherent complexities, contradictions, and inherent messiness. Those who sincerely embark on this profound journey must be prepared to bravely face their own inner shadows, acknowledge their deepest pains, and diligently dismantle the comforting illusions they have carefully constructed about themselves and the world around them. The ultimate truth is that awakening is not a destination to be reached, but an endless and evolving journey, where with each step we take, we encounter new layers of ourselves to be unveiled, understood, and ultimately integrated into the ever-expanding tapestry of our being. The often neglected dark side of awakening, the challenging encounters with our ego and our shadows, is not an unfortunate detour, but in fact, an absolutely essential and transformative part of the entire process. It is in bravely navigating this inner darkness that we discover the true depths of our strength, the boundless capacity of our resilience, and our innate ability to love and accept not only the radiant light within ourselves and others, but also the intricate and often misunderstood beauty of the shadow. I sincerely hope that this exploration has offered some valuable insights and support for you on your own unique and unfolding journey of expanding consciousness. Thank you deeply for watching.